The auctioneer's hammer slammed against the wooden block, and in that instant, the world seemed to stop because the last coin in Lone Eagle's possession had just bought him a woman's fate. The year was 1874, and the dust-blown town of Dry Creek sat under a merciless sun. Every man in the crowd had come not for cattle, not for land, but for something more chilling flesh and desperation. A wooden platform stood at the center of the square, and on it, chained like cattle, stood a woman of 30, her dark hair tangled, her dress torn but clinging to the dignity she refused to surrender. Her name was Evelyn Harper, though no one in the crowd cared to ask. Lone Eagle did. He stood tall in the sea of white, Stetsons and dust-covered boots, a solitary Apache warrior, his presence enough to stir whispers of unease. His copper skin caught the sunlight, his black hair flowed like ink, and around his neck hung a worn beaded necklace, the only relic of his family left to him. He had nothing but a single silver coin pressed into his palm, earned through days of breaking horses for a rancher who spat at his feet when paying him. The bidding had started low, cruel laughter rolling as men shouted numbers, boasting what they'd do with the lady once she was theirs. Evelyn's gray eyes scanned the crowd, hard and defiant, but when she saw Lone Eagle, saw the fire in his gaze, the way he never looked at her like property, her breath caught. He wasn't here to claim her. He was here to save her. When the bidding rose beyond his means, Lone Eagle stepped forward, his voice steady and cutting through the jeers. "1 coin," he said, raising the piece of silver skyward. The crowd erupted in laughter. 1 coin was an insult, but something in his voice silenced them, an oath unspoken, a blade unsheathed. The auctioneer's sneer faltered. Perhaps it was the way Lone Eagle stood, as if he were offering not money but judgment. Perhaps it was the hush that fell over Evelyn herself, who lifted her chin as if already delivered. "Sold?" The auctioneer spat, slamming the gavel down. A storm moved in Lone Eagle's chest as he walked forward. Evelyn was shoved toward him, her wrists still bound, her steps unsteady. The guard's hand lingered on her shoulder too long, his grin twisted. Lone Eagle's hand shot out, gripping the man's wrist with the strength of iron. Their eyes locked, and for a heartbeat, the guard understood this Apache's mercy was thinner than smoke. Evelyn's eyes darted between them, her heart pounding so loud she feared the whole town could hear it. For years she had been running from debts, from men who wanted her body, from the silence of an empty home after the death of her husband. She never thought her road would end at a block in front of laughing strangers. And yet, here was this man, this stranger who had given everything for her with a single coin. He turned to her, his voice low and raw. "Your soul belongs to me now," Lone Eagle said, his words not possession but a vow. "And I swear no one will ever break it again." The crowd booed, called him savage, called her ruined. But Lone Eagle ignored them, cutting the ropes from her wrists with his knife. She stumbled, but he caught her, the strength of his arm a promise she didn't yet know how to trust. They walked through the dust and out of Dry Creek, backs burning from the stairs, ears ringing from curses hurled. But Evelyn's heart was stranger still. It beat not with fear, but with the fragile bloom of hope. And as the sun sank low, Lone Eagle spoke again, his voice like a storm rolling across the desert. "They think I bought you," he whispered, "but I gave my last coin not to own you, only to set you free. Yet in freedom, if you will it, walk beside me." Evelyn stopped in the road, her shackled past clashing with the vast unknown ahead. She searched his face, an Apache warrior, an outcast, a man who had nothing left but his word, and for the first time in years, she believed someone meant it. The desert wind rose, carrying away the echoes of the auction, and with it began a story that neither of them could have imagined, a tale of survival, vengeance, and the bond of two souls who refused to bow to the cruelty of the West. The night air was thick with the smell of gunpowder and whiskey as Lone Eagle led Evelyn down the dusty trail, out of Dry Creek, The town's noise faded behind them, but the tension did not. Every step away from that auction block felt like stolen time, and both of them knew it. Men don't forget when pride is stripped from them, and every man in that square believed Evelyn had been theirs to take. Evelyn stumbled on the uneven path. The raw rope burns on her wrists, stinging. Lone Eagle slowed his pace, offering his arm. She hesitated, pride flaring, but her legs betrayed her. She leaned against him, her gray eyes sharp even in exhaustion. "You didn't save me," she whispered, almost bitter. "You just painted a target on us both." Lone Eagle's jaw tightened. He scanned the desert horizon, ears tuned to the distant echoes of horses. "They would have broken you," he said simply. "Now they will have to break me instead." They walked until the shadows of mesquite trees swallowed them, the stars burning above like cold fire. Lone Eagle finally halted at a narrow canyon, a place hidden from the road. He knelt, striking flint against stone, coaxing flame from dry brush. The firelight painted his chest and shoulders in copper and shadow, the beads and feathers of his necklace gleaming as he worked in silence. Evelyn sat across from him, hugging her knees to her chest, her tattered dress whispering against the dirt. She studied him, this man who had given his last coin for her freedom, who now sat silent as a sentinel, eyes scanning every shadow. "You could have let them take me," she said finally. Her voice cracked, betraying the truth she'd been hiding, fear, but also wonder. "Why risk yourself?" Lone Eagle lifted his gaze to hers, the flames dancing in his dark eyes. "Because no one is coin. Not you. Not me." His words struck deeper than she expected. Evelyn swallowed, turning her face away. She remembered her late husband's gambling debts, the men who had hunted her across counties, the weight of every cruel bargain that had led her here. No one had ever said such a thing to her. To Lone Eagle, her worth wasn't measured in dollars. The night deepened. Coyotes yipped in the distance, and Evelyn's eyelids grew heavy. Lone Eagle did not sleep. He sat cross-legged, his knife resting across his thighs, listening to the night. When the wind shifted, he heard it hoofbeats. He rose instantly, placing a hand on Evelyn's shoulder. "Wake." Her eyes fluttered open, confusion quickly replaced by fear as she too heard the distant thunder of horses. Lone Eagle doused the fire with a sweep of sand, plunging them into darkness. The hoofbeats grew louder, echoing down the canyon walls. Evelyn's heart pounded as she clutched at his arm. "They followed us?" She whispered. He nodded once, lips pressed tight. "Men who lose pride always chase." In the moonlight, Lone Eagle led her higher into the rocks, moving like a shadow, silent and sure-footed. Evelyn stumbled behind him, the terrain tearing at her bare feet. She bit back a cry of pain, but Lone Eagle stopped, turning back to lift her into his arms. She gasped, startled by his strength as he carried her with ease. Muscles taut beneath her as he scaled the stone. From their perch, they looked down into the canyon. 4 riders thundered below, lanterns swaying, voices harsh. Evelyn recognized one of them, the guard who had shoved her at the auction block. His laugh carried through the night. "She can't get far." "We'll find her, and when we do, the Apache dies first." Evelyn's stomach churned. She pressed her face into Lone Eagle's shoulder, whispering, "They'll kill you because of me." Lone Eagle's voice rumbled like distant thunder. "No, they'll come because of their own greed. You are not their shame to claim. You are mine to protect." The riders passed beneath them, unaware of the figures hidden in the shadows above. Lone Eagle waited until their voices faded, until only silence and the desert wind remained. Then he set Evelyn down gently. She looked at him in the moonlight, shirtless, scarred, unyielding, yet strangely tender when his gaze met hers. "They won't stop," she said softly. "No," Lone Eagle agreed. "And neither will I, for the first time in years." Evelyn felt something ignite in her chest, not just fear, but the fragile beginnings of trust. She wrapped her arms around herself and nodded, knowing that her life was now bound to this warrior's oath. As dawn began to break over the desert, painting the sky in hues of red and gold, Evelyn realized the truth. Freedom was not the end of her journey. It was the beginning. And beside Lone Eagle, she would have to fight to keep it. The desert sun rose like a hammer, striking heat into the canyon stones. Lone Eagle and Evelyn pressed on through the rugged terrain, their shadows stretching long behind them. The night's chase still echoed in Evelyn's mind, the sound of horses, the cruel laughter of men who thought her theirs to reclaim. But here, in the endless sprawl of red earth and sky, silence reigned. Her dress clung damp with sweat, and her feet bled from sharp rocks. Lone Eagle noticed, though she tried to hide her pain. Without a word, he cut strips of leather from his belt and wrapped them around her feet, his fingers surprisingly gentle for hands built of muscle and battle scars. Evelyn wanted to speak to thank him, to ask him why he kept helping her, but his eyes stayed on the horizon, unyielding, as if he carried burdens heavier than her gratitude. By midday, they reached a grove of cottonwoods by a narrow stream. Evelyn collapsed by the water, cupping her hands to drink. The coolness soothed her parched throat, but her mind still raced. She turned toward him. "They won't stop, you know," she said, voice sharp. "Those men. They'll hunt until they have blood." Lone Eagle knelt beside the stream, washing the dust from his face. Water ran down the ridges of his chest, glistening across the necklace of beads and bone that marked him as Apache. His gaze flicked to her, steady and calm. "Then we go where they will not follow," Evelyn frowned. "And where is that?" His jaw tightened before he answered. "Home." The word felt heavy, weighted with memory. Evelyn realized then he wasn't wandering without purpose. He was leading her into Apache country, a place she had only ever heard about in fearful whispers around campfires and saloon tables. White men called it dangerous, untamed. To her, it was unknown. As the day stretched on, the land shifted. The canyon gave way to open plains where wild horses roamed in the distance. Lone Eagle's steps grew lighter, his posture taller. Evelyn saw it in him, the way the land seemed to breathe with him, as if each stone and blade of grass recognized him as their own. But her heart clenched with unease. "Will they accept me?" she asked finally. Lone Eagle stopped, turning to face her fully. His eyes searched hers. "You are under my oath." "That is all that matters." Yet Evelyn could not shake the doubt. She had been bought and sold, judged and mocked, her life defined by men's choices. Could a people who saw her as an outsider truly believe she was worth saving? That evening, they made camp in a hollow carved into red rock. Lone Eagle roasted strips of rabbit over a small fire, the scent of smoke mingling with the desert wind. Evelyn watched him work, the firelight etching the lines of his face, the strength in his arms. He seemed carved from the land itself, enduring, untamed, eternal. She finally spoke, her voice softer. "You swore my soul belonged to you forever. Why say that?" Lone Eagle's gaze lifted from the fire. His words came slow, deliberate. "In my people's tongue, it is not possession. It is bond, two spirits tied. I gave my last coin not to buy you, but to bind myself to your fate. You live, I live. You fall, I fall." Evelyn's throat tightened. No man had ever spoken to her like that, not even her husband. She had been bartered, used, discarded. Yet this man, who owed her nothing, who risked everything, spoke of her soul as if it were something sacred. Before she could answer, the distant call of a hawk pierced the air. Lone Eagle stiffened, his hand on his knife. He rose, scanning the cliffs above. Evelyn followed his gaze and froze. Silhouettes moved along the ridge, silent, watchful. Not the drunken riders from Dry Creek, but figures painted in ochre and ash, their bows slung across their backs. Apache warriors. Evelyn's pulse quickened. She reached for Lone Eagle's arm, whispering, "Your people?" He nodded once, though his jaw was set. "My people." The warriors descended like shadows, surrounding the camp in a circle of calm but undeniable power. One of them, older and broad-shouldered, stepped forward. His gaze slid past Lone Eagle and landed on Evelyn, sharp and questioning. Lone Eagle straightened, his voice firm as he spoke in Apache. Evelyn could not understand the words, but she understood the tone. It was the voice of a man making a claim, an oath, a defense. The older warrior's eyes narrowed, then shifted to Evelyn again. The fire crackled between them, throwing sparks into the night. Evelyn's heart pounded as she realized the truth. She was no longer running from Dry Creek alone. Now she stood in the hands of a people who might see her as intruder, burden, or worse, and it would be Lone Eagle's word alone that decided whether she would be accepted or cast out to the desert. The fire popped and hissed as Lone Eagle stood tall before the circle of warriors. Evelyn sat frozen, the weight of a dozen eyes on her, their stares sharp as arrows, their silence heavier than the desert night. The older warrior, whose shoulders bore scars like carved stone, stepped closer. His hair was streaked with gray, and his eyes gleamed like flint. He spoke in Apache, his voice deep, commanding. Evelyn could not understand the words, but she felt their edge. Lone Eagle answered in the same tongue, his tone steady, defiant. The two men's voices clashed like steel, one challenging, the other refusing to bend. Evelyn's fingers dug into the dirt. She wanted to ask what they were saying, but she knew it wasn't her place. Not yet. The older warrior pointed at Evelyn, his expression grim. A murmur rippled through the others. Some looked at her with suspicion, others with disgust. One younger warrior spit into the fire, the flames hissing in response. Evelyn's stomach knotted. She had endured the hatred of white men, but this was different. Here, she was a trespasser in a world she did not understand. Finally, Lone Eagle turned to her. His face was unreadable, but his eyes softened slightly when they met hers. "They question why I bring you," he said quietly in English. "They say I tie myself to danger by binding to you." Evelyn's throat tightened. She wanted to say she hadn't asked for this, hadn't wanted to be saved only to endanger him. But the truth sat heavy in her chest. She did want to live, and she did want him by her side. The older warrior barked something again, stepping close until he and Lone Eagle stood nearly chest to chest. The air vibrated with the force of their exchange. Then, with sudden violence, the older man struck Lone Eagle's chest with his open palm. Evelyn gasped, lurching forward, but Lone Eagle didn't move. He absorbed the blow, his muscles tense, his jaw set. Then he spoke with quiet intensity, his words firm, unyielding. The silence that followed was unbearable. Evelyn's heartbeat thundered in her ears. Finally, the older warrior gave a sharp nod, though his eyes still burned with distrust. He motioned to the others, and they began to move, some melting back into the shadows, others circling closer. Lone Eagle knelt by Evelyn, placing a hand lightly on her arm. "They will take us to camp," he said. "But they will watch you." Evelyn swallowed hard. "And if they decide I'm not welcome?" His hand tightened slightly, a promise written in the strength of his grip. "Then I fight for you." The walk to the Apache camp was long, the moon high above, the desert stretching endless around them. Evelyn kept close to Lone Eagle, feeling the warrior's eyes on her every step. She could almost hear their thoughts. Why had he brought her? What made her worth his last coin? When they reached the camp, the scene stunned her. Dozens of fires glowed across a wide valley, their smoke rising like ghosts into the night sky. Tents and brush shelters dotted the ground, families gathered around the flames. The smell of roasting meat mingled with the soft drumming of voices, a rhythm as old as the land. Children peered at her with wide, curious eyes, while women pulled them close, whispering. Evelyn felt the heat of shame on her cheeks, wishing she could vanish into the earth. But Lone Eagle walked tall beside her, each step steady, his presence shielding her like armor. The older warrior led them to the largest fire where a circle of elders sat. Their faces were lined with wisdom and years, their eyes sharp as falcons. Evelyn stood stiff, her heart pounding so hard she feared it might split her chest. Lone Eagle spoke again, his words in Apache, his voice resonant. Evelyn caught fragments of his tone: respect, conviction, defiance. When he finished, silence followed. An elder woman, her long gray braids gleaming in the firelight, turned her gaze on Evelyn. Her eyes were not cruel but searching, as if peering into her very soul. Then she spoke softly to Lone Eagle, who nodded. He turned to Evelyn. They want to know your story. Your truth. Not mine. Not theirs. Yours. Evelyn froze. Her mouth went dry. For years she had hidden her past, her husband's debts, the shame of being left alone, the auction block. Speaking it aloud to strangers felt like stripping her soul bare. But then she remembered Lone Eagle's words. No one is coin. Not you. Not me. She drew a deep breath, her voice trembling but strong enough to carry. My name is Evelyn Harper, she began. I was sold, betrayed, left to die among men who saw me as nothing. This man, she gestured to Lone Eagle, he gave all he had to save me. Not because I'm worth coin, but because he believes I'm worth more. If that offends you, then hate me. But do not doubt him. He gave me back what I thought I'd lost forever, my soul. The fire crackled. The circle of elders studied her in silence. Lone Eagle's eyes never left her, steady as the earth itself. And in that moment, Evelyn realized her fate no longer rested in the hands of Dry Creek's auctioneer, nor in the jeers of drunken riders. It rested in the hearts of these people, and in the bond she now shared with the warrior who had claimed her not as property, but as promise. Dawn broke over the Apache camp, spilling gold across the red desert earth. Evelyn sat on the edge of the fire circle, hands wrapped tightly around her knees, her gaze fixed on Lone Eagle. The night had been long, filled with whispers, glances, and the unspoken judgment of a people she did not yet know. The elders had spoken, though Evelyn had not understood their words. Lone Eagle had interpreted, telling her that her place here was not yet earned. She was a guest, and guests in Apache lands were measured by courage, heart, and honesty. Her stomach churned with fear. She had spent years surviving the cruelty of men, but this judgment of silence, of presence, of being watched felt sharper. She wanted to run, yet the memory of the auction, of Lone Eagle's hand gripping hers, of the last coin he spent, anchored her. A sudden clamor drew her attention. Lone Eagle rose, his shadow stretching across the fire. He turned toward the warriors gathered on the perimeter, their expressions taut. A group of riders appeared in the distance, men from Dry Creek, their silhouettes unmistakable against the morning sky. Evelyn's heart leapt into her throat. They had tracked them across miles of desert, relentless and merciless. The elders murmured among themselves, their hands on weapons, eyes darting to Lone Eagle. He placed a firm hand on Evelyn's shoulder. You will walk with me, he said, voice steady, and show them you are not prey. You are not a prize. You are human. She swallowed hard. Her hand shook, but she rose, meeting his gaze. His eyes, dark and unwavering, gave her courage. Together, they stepped from the circle, moving toward the ridge that overlooked the approaching riders. The men from Dry Creek slowed as they neared, laughter fading into uncertainty as they saw Lone Eagle standing tall, Evelyn at his side. Their leader, a burly man with a jagged scar across his cheek, spurred his horse forward. That's her. Bring her back. The Apache can't stop us. Lone Eagle did not flinch. He set his jaw, the muscles of his chest rippling under the rising sun. Evelyn, her heart hammering, clenched her fists. She realized what he meant by his words. She had to face them, not as a victim, but as someone who refused to be broken. She stepped forward, raising her chin, her voice carrying across the wind. "She is not yours." Lone Eagle's words echoed after hers, reinforcing her claim, but it was her declaration that stunned the riders. The scar-faced man sneered. "You? A woman?" Evelyn's gray eyes blazed. "I am more than what you bought, more than what you sold." She gestured toward Lone Eagle, "gave me a chance to live with honor, and I will not let cowards like you take it away." For a heartbeat, silence held the ridge. Then Lone Eagle drew a long, deep breath and lifted his arms in a gesture of defiance. The warriors behind him, inspired by his courage, moved into formation. Horses snorted, weapons glinting in the sunlight, the desert wind carrying the scent of dust and iron. The men from Dry Creek faltered. They had faced Lone Eagle once in the auction, but here, on the ridge, in the presence of his people, they sensed the futility of their greed. And yet, pride kept them tethered to confrontation. Evelyn's pulse raced, but the fear she had carried for years began to transform into a strange exhilaration. She could feel the power of standing beside someone who believed in her, someone whose bond with her was forged not in ownership, but in respect. The scar-faced man hesitated, then slowly pulled his horse back. The rest of his men followed, unwilling to risk a fight they could not win. Evelyn exhaled sharply, the tension draining from her shoulders. Lone Eagle lowered his arms, turning to her. A faint smile touched his lips, though his eyes remained vigilant. "You stood your ground," he said softly. "They see now that you are not theirs to command." Evelyn's throat tightened. She had faced fear, danger, and judgment in a single morning, and survived not because of luck, but because Lone Eagle's faith in her had given her the strength to fight her own demons. The elders approached slowly, nodding at both of them. One elder woman's eyes softened as she studied Evelyn. Lone Eagle's hand brushed against hers, a silent promise that whatever came next, he would not let her face it alone. And as the desert sun climbed higher, Evelyn realized that this bond, this struggle, this defiance was the beginning of her true life. She was no longer just a survivor of cruel men. She was a woman who could stand, fight, and live beside the warrior who had claimed her soul not as possession, but as a promise. The morning sun painted the desert gold as Lone Eagle led Evelyn deeper into the Apache camp. The elders had conferred overnight, and while whispers still followed her, the tension in the air had shifted. She was no longer merely a guest under suspicion. She was becoming part of a story she didn't yet fully understand, a story tied to Lone Eagle and the land he called home. Evelyn's bare feet sank into the sand as she followed him through the maze of tents and brush shelters. Children peered at her from behind the warmth of their mothers' skirts, curious but cautious. Some of the younger warriors nodded as they passed, their eyes testing, their respect growing. Lone Eagle's voice was quiet but firm. "They will watch you, but they will also learn. Do not fear them." She nodded, though her nerves frayed at every glance. She was learning that acceptance here was not given. It was earned through courage, honesty, and presence. The day passed with lessons she could never have imagined. She was taught to recognize edible plants, to track movement across sand and rock, to move quietly without announcing herself to the desert. Lone Eagle watched her closely, correcting her posture, showing her how to bend the body like the wind, how to listen with ears and heart alike. By midday, Lone Eagle led her to a rocky plateau overlooking the plains. The wind was hot and dry, tugging at her hair and dress. From this vantage point, Evelyn could see the vastness of the desert, the distant mountains painting jagged shadows, and the streams that shimmered like silver threads across the red earth. It was a beauty unlike anything she had ever known, but also a place of raw danger both from man and nature. "Look," Lone Eagle said, his voice low. "They may come again." Evelyn squinted toward the horizon. Sure enough, the faint outline of riders appeared, dust trailing behind them. The men from Dry Creek. Her pulse raced, but this time fear was tempered with resolve. She had stood beside Lone Eagle before, and she had survived. She would survive again. Lone Eagle knelt beside her, setting a hand over hers. "Today you will learn to protect yourself," he said. "Not for them, not for me, but for yourself." He handed her a small, worn dagger, its blade polished smooth. Evelyn's fingers closed around it, feeling the weight, the potential, the responsibility. Hours passed as Lone Eagle guided her through the basic stance, grip, movement. He corrected her when she faltered, encouraged her when she succeeded. Sweat coated their skin, dust stuck to their bodies, and yet she felt alive in a way she had never known. Each motion, each step, each lesson tied her closer to him and to this land. As the sun began to set, casting fiery hues across the desert, the riders from Dry Creek appeared closer, their intentions clear. Lone Eagle placed a hand gently on Evelyn's shoulder. "They will test us. Stay close, trust what you have learned." The riders dismounted, weapons drawn, and advanced cautiously, wary of the Apache warriors now moving to flank them from the ridges. Lone Eagle stepped forward, chest bare, muscles tense, long black hair whipping in the wind, his necklace of beads and feathers glinting in the last light of day. Evelyn stood beside him, dagger in hand, breathing steady despite the pounding of her heart. She realized then that she no longer felt like the frightened woman from Dry Creek. She was part of something larger, something worth defending. Two forces faced each other across the sand. Lone Eagle's eyes locked on the leader of the Dry Creek riders, unwavering and commanding. Evelyn felt his strength flow into her, steadying her, binding her courage to his dot, and in that moment, as the desert wind roared around them, Evelyn understood the truth of his vow. Her soul did not belong to the auctioneer, nor to the cruel men who had tried to claim her. Her soul belonged to herself and to the warrior who had risked everything to protect it. The riders hesitated, sensing the unity, the resolve, the unbreakable bond between Apache and woman alike. Lone Eagle's chest rose and fell, his gaze steady. Evelyn mirrored him, dagger poised, heart fierce. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the desert in deep crimson and shadow. And the stage was set for loyalty, for courage, for the promise that no man would ever own her soul again. The desert night was alive with tension. Every shadow stretched long and threatening. Lone Eagle stood shirtless on the ridge, muscles taut, long black hair whipping in the wind, tribal jewelry glinting against his bronzed skin. Beside him, Evelyn's gray eyes glimmered in the moonlight, dagger clutched firmly in her hand. The Dry Creek riders had surrounded the base of the plateau, but Lone Eagle's presence and the Apache warriors flanking the ridge made hesitation ripple through their ranks. Evelyn felt the rhythm of the desert pulse beneath her bare feet, the whisper of sand, the cry of distant coyotes, the murmur of warriors waiting to act. Her heart pounded, not in fear, but in the thrill of standing on her own ground, beside the man who had claimed her soul not as property, but as promise. The scar-faced leader of the Dry Creek riders shouted, his voice cracking with arrogance. "Come down, Apache. That woman is ours. She belongs to us." Lone Eagle's voice rose like thunder, firm and unwavering. "She belongs to herself, and anyone who dares challenge that will meet the desert's justice." Evelyn's breath caught as she saw the rider hesitate. Lone Eagle's defiance radiated like a living force, and she felt herself drawn into it, emboldened. This was no longer the timid woman who had been auctioned for a coin. This was a woman standing in the fire of her own freedom, her courage sharpened by every step of the journey. A sudden movement. The leader spurred his horse forward, raising a rifle. The desert seemed to hold its breath. Lone Eagle's eyes narrowed, and in one fluid motion, he dropped to the ground, grabbing a rifle from a nearby warrior and firing a warning shot into the sand near the advancing horse. The bullet kicked up dust at the rider's hooves, halting him. Evelyn gasped, but did not falter. She moved to mirror his stance, dagger poised, muscles tense. Lone Eagle's eyes flicked to her briefly, a silent acknowledgement. He trusted her. Then the desert erupted. Apache warriors surged down the ridge in controlled precision, flanking the riders with the skill of hunters. Horses reared, dust and sand swirled in clouds, and the Dry Creek men realized their greed had led them into a trap. Lone Eagle moved like lightning, body and mind in harmony with the land. Every step he took, every word he spoke, seemed to command the desert itself. Evelyn ducked behind a boulder, heart racing, but she no longer felt helpless. She slashed at a man attempting to circle behind them, her dagger biting into leather. Pain flared, but so did exhilaration. She was no longer prey. She was part of something larger than herself, part of the pulse of the land and the people who had claimed her. The leader of the Dry Creek Riders finally raised his hands in surrender, his pride shattered. Lone Eagle stood tall on the ridge, arms crossed, eyes dark and unwavering. The desert wind whipped through his hair, carrying the echo of his victory. Evelyn stepped beside him, chest heaving. Dirt and blood streaked across her arms and face, yet she felt alive in a way she never had before. The Apache warriors cheered softly, not in cruelty, but in acknowledgement. Evelyn's place among them was no longer questioned. She had proven herself, not with coin, not with pleading, but with courage and the bond she shared with Lone Eagle. Lone Eagle lowered his gaze to her, a rare softness breaking through his otherwise fierce demeanor. "You see," he said quietly, "your soul was never theirs to claim. It was yours all along." "I only reminded you of that truth." Evelyn's throat tightened. She had seen cruelty, betrayal, and greed in her life. But here under the desert stars, with the warrior who had saved her, she felt the first stirrings of belonging. Her hand brushed against his, not in ownership, but in mutual acknowledgement, a silent vow between two souls who had risked everything for each other. As dawn broke over the horizon, painting the desert in fiery reds and golds, Evelyn and Lone Eagle stood side by side, facing the endless expanse of land that was no longer just survival, it was freedom, courage, and the promise of a future they would carve together. The auction, the cruelty of Dry Creek, the fear, they were gone, reduced to echoes in the wind. Evelyn took a deep breath, the desert air filling her lungs, and for the first time in years she felt wholly alive. Lone Eagle's eyes swept the horizon, then rested on her. "Together," he said, voice low but certain. "Together," she echoed, knowing that from this day forward, her soul would belong to no one but herself and to the warrior who had claimed it with honor, courage, and love. And in that desert dawn, they walked forward not as captor and rescued, but as equals bound by trials, trust, and the promise of a life unbroken.